Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video, and today we're going to talk about promises. So we're going to talk about the why and the how of the promises. I'll try to focus more on the why. So let's get started. So the first problem that I want to tackle is, why do we need promises in the first place? And the answer to that is basically JavaScript is asynchronous. But why is JavaScript asynchronous? That is something that I want you guys to understand. So for those who don't know, JavaScript is a single threaded language. So all of JavaScript just runs in one single thread, which is referred to as the main thread. So we have a lot of APIs in JavaScript as well as in Node.js, which do some IO operations. So the thing with IO operations is that they are slow. An example of IO operation might be making a server call, or maybe making a database call, or maybe accessing a file on the file system. So now we have a scenario where the language is single threaded. That means it can do one thing at a time, and you have these operations which take a lot of time. Now when you think about a lot of time, it is very contextual. So basically you might think that if you make an API call in JavaScript, or you make a database call in JavaScript, or you try to read a file in JavaScript, it probably takes around a couple of seconds. When you think about it in context of a microprocessor which executes instructions in order of milliseconds, a couple of seconds is a huge amount of time. So you have this language which has just one main thread, or it can do one thing at a time, and you have these operations which require a lot of time. If you try to push these IO operations onto the main thread, what would happen is your website will not be responsive. So suppose if I'm making a fetch call, and if it actually runs on the main thread, and at the same time if I try to click on a button, it won't happen. So even if the fetch call doesn't have to do anything with the button click, you will still not be able to click the button, because it is doing one operation at a time. That is, it's fetching data from the specified URL. You have to introduce some kind of asynchronicity in JavaScript, and that's why you have things like promises, you have things like callbacks, async await. Those are constructs which help you handle asynchronicity in JavaScript. So what is asynchronicity? Basically is that you make a call which is going to take a lot of time, and you kind of forget about it. You push it onto the side, and whenever that call completes, then the result is returned back to the main thread. So the main thread makes the call, and then it goes back to what needs to be done. And once that function, which will take a lot of time, completes its execution, returns the result of that execution back to the main thread. And that's why you have constructs like promises, callbacks, and async await. Now we know why do we need promises. Now let's just talk about in which cases do we use promises. So I have a piece of code here which tries to explain a scenario where you would need promise. So this is kind of an example that I've extracted out of one of my projects, and this is not a running piece of code. Let me just explain what this piece of code does. So this is basically a Node.js script. Whenever there's a request to slash or root, or I'll just change it to sign up maybe. So whenever there is a get request made on a sign up REST API point, this piece of code runs, and what it does, it checks whether a user exists, and if it exists, then it's gonna return true, or it's gonna return false. So rather than sign up, let me just change it to a more suitable name, check user name. So what is the problem with this piece of code is, whenever you are making a call to this function, so whenever the V8 runtime executes this piece of code, it's gonna jump to this, and this is basically an asynchronous operation. What I mean by that is, when JavaScript encounters this line, it understands that this is going to return a promise, because check user would eventually return a promise. It knows that, and what JavaScript will do, it will just push it out of its main thread, and it will start executing what's next. So there is nothing here, so it will go here, and it'll just then you probably have rest dot status maybe 200, and this will return, and then it will just straight away return 200 with no data. This is something that you don't want. What you want to do is, you want to kind of handle this asynchronicity in your code, and the way you do it is by introducing promises. So what I would end up doing is I'd wrap this inside a promise. So you can do something like this. And there are many ways of handling it. This is not the ideal way of doing it, but I kind of find it better. There are people who debate that there is async await, which is far more cleaner and far better than using this promise syntax. But I don't prefer async await, and probably I'll make a video on that as well in the future. So this is something that I would do. So I would probably push it inside of a promise, and I'll do this. Then, and this will just return is present, and I'll say rest dot status 200 dot, I think it's data, I'm not sure, or it's send. I think send is present. Remove this really quick. And we are not here interested in what will happen if the promise gets rejected. We'll just probably chain it with a catch and we'll do some stuff. So I'm not really interested in that right now. So what I really want you to understand is what is happening right now. So whenever there is a call made to check if user exists, it goes into this, and this returns a promise. And then you have some call, which is a DB call. So this is an IO call, which would take time. And once this function kind of finishes its execution, then it would pass its value to this then, and it is assuming that it would be a success, and it will kind of pass this value to is present. And then we have these two options, which are resolve and reject. So this is basically telling whether the promise was successful or was the promise rejected. A promise can have three states. It can be in pending, it can be in resolve, and it can be in reject state. The promise is in pending state when it's neither resolved nor rejected. Resolve means there was a success, and reject is basically the system has failed. When I say resolve is present, it's going to pass this to this callback, to the then callback, and then you can use directly is present inside of this, and you can return. So this is one scenario where I'd use promises. So that's going to be it for today's video. If you guys liked it, be sure to hit the like button and the subscribe button. And thanks a lot for the response that I got on the previous video. It was overwhelming. Thank you guys. Thanks a lot. And keep supporting. Yeah, thank you guys for joining, and I'll see you guys in the next one.